Welcome, friends, guests. I'm Kathy Nalivaiko, president of the Ukrainian Institute of America here. It's really wonderful to see so many friends, old friends, new friends, and faces here in the room. We have had a successful open house so far. We opened at noon, and the crowds have been flowing in and out. Many people who have never been here, but it's really heartening to know that there are so many people who are interested in learning about Ukraine and in showing their support for Ukraine on this important day. So those of you who actually haven't had an opportunity to take a look at some of the exhibits upstairs, I would encourage you to do that afterwards. We have a real mix of things, including an exhibit by Bevza, the designer. I'm wearing her skirt. And we have lovely, amazing chairs made by a Ukrainian company on which President Zelensky sits. So there's something for everyone. We have a wine tasting also, so lots of things for people to experience. But right now, we're here to have some serious conversations. And we all are so grateful that you're joining us today on this day of reflection, again, to celebrate the resilience, the creativity, and the very, very good nature of the Ukrainian people in the face of horrible war. As most of you know, today marks 2 years since Ukraine has endured and pushed back on the full weight of the Russian invasion. But it's been a decade of war, and the devastation is horrible, tragic, and it's constant. But this is exactly in these moments of challenge and calamity that the true essence of the Ukrainian people shines the brightest, with fearless perseverance and persistent determination. Some might, if you know Ukrainians, might even say stubbornness, but you didn't hear it here. For over 10 years now, Russia has oppressed our nation and our people. It's difficult to believe that even now, in 2024, after a decade of war, the genocidal barrage continues. Since the Russian annexation of Crimea, the ongoing war in eastern Ukraine has left a devastating impact, resulting in enormous loss of life, displacement, and economic hardship. While our people have been burdened with conflict, they remain strong in defending the independence of their country and their people. With the onset of hardship and adversity, we have witnessed resilience and unwavering tenacity. To me, the thing that really stands out is the fearless attitude of the nation. There is no victim mentality. There is no poor us. Instead, there is the we still stand and will always stand attitude. Hence the name of our open house today, #UkraineStands. Throughout this difficult time, your unyielding support and solidarity have been invaluable. To our friends near and far who have stood steadfastly by our side, we express our most profound gratitude. Thank you to all of you here today, and to those with us in spirit. We've received many messages, and we really appreciate that. And they've expressed their international support for Ukraine in media and throughout the day. We're grateful for these friendships and unions that go beyond borders, because we all connect as human beings that want the same things for ourselves. We want ourselves and our families to be safe, healthy, and happy. So before we move on to our first panel and our speakers, I ask that all of you join me in standing for a moment of silence to honor those who have paid the ultimate price in defending Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial borders. Thank you. So now I am delighted to introduce our first panel. Vladimir Yermolenko is a journalist, philosopher, president of PEN Ukraine, and he is joined by Larry Wolf, professor of European history at New York University. Vladimir is known for his insightful analysis and advocacy of free expression. His most recent book, Fluid Ideologies, published in 2018, won the Yuri Shevelyov Prize and the Petro Mohila Award. Joining him is Larry Wolf, Professor of European History at New York University, the Executive Director of the NYU Remarque Institute, and the Co-Director of NYU Florence at Villa La Pietra. He is the longtime book review editor for Harvard Ukrainian Studies, and he is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Please join me in welcoming them today.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us on such a somber anniversary. Thank you, Kathy, for the remarks. Thank you for the moment of silence, because I think it's incredibly important to remember sacrifices that are being made on behalf of effectively all of Europe, all of the West, and all of civilization, society. This conversation is very much conceptualized as helping provide context. I just came from another conversation across the hall with journalists from the Kyiv Independent who said that they understood they need to provide additional context to Western journalists, to Western audiences, to English-speaking audiences, because a lot of people don't understand where Ukraine is on a map, people don't understand where Ukraine is historically, people don't understand where Ukraine is today. And so we kind of conceptualize this talk as a conversation about the de-imperializing struggle of Ukraine historically and today. And as I have a historian and a philosopher, I think that if we're going to talk about context and history, I will start with the historian. So Professor Wolf, this is a question to both of you, and it's a big one, so take your time with your remarks if you want to. How does Ukraine's struggle today fit into the history of imperialization, de-imperialization, and re-imperialization of Europe?
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you all for coming. For me, it's an honor to be here today discussing these issues with Volodymyr, with Christopher, with all of you. Empire is, well, we all live with the legacies of empires. New York has its own imperial history, as does every country in the world. The Ukraine's history in the 20th century was a complicated wrestling with imperial presences and imperial legacies at the same time. The 20th century begins with the collapse of Tsarist Russia and the Habsburg monarchy, two of the empires that had stakes in the Ukrainian lands. And I think that we would tell the whole 20th century a little bit in terms of what the end of those empires meant and what kind of new imperial bonds were created, especially in the ways in which we would understand the Soviet Union to be a reconstruction of a Russian imperial polity. Honestly, I was kind of shocked in 2022 by the shamelessness with which a new imperialism, which I think I would qualify as a nostalgia for empire, and I wonder whether you would agree with that, became the basis for an aggressive Russian foreign policy which completely shattered the norms of the international world that we were living in up until 2022, although, as it's been pointed out, those bonds were already shattered in 2014, and this is not a war that only began in 2022. Perhaps it would be fairer to say that the wider world became more intensely aware of it and its implications in 2022. Can I pass this to you, Volodymyr?
Sure. First, I'm happy that Professor Wolf is here. Why? Because explaining the Ukrainian realities, explaining this war, and by the way, we are trying to do a lot of work with Ukraine World. That this is a website that I had with our podcast, which is called Explaining Ukraine. We're trying to do that from Ukraine, from Kyiv, from other cities, from Kharkiv, from Kherson, from other cities. But it is I mean, everywhere here you would hear it's second anniversary, blah, blah, blah. Well, the one thing is to say that it is 10 years of the war. But another thing is to say that we will not understand what is happening in Ukraine right now without understanding what has happened in the early 20th century, without understanding what has happened in the 1930s with executed Renaissance, without understanding what has happened with Ukrainian dissidents, Shizdesyatniki, in 1970s when they were sent again to Gulag, and going even deeper. For example, Larry is an author of a classical book, Inventing Eastern Europe, and the book is talking about 18th century. And I do think that 18th century is one of the keys to understand what has happened. Because if we take just 3 years of the 18th century, from 1772 to 1775, these are 3 years when the sovereignty of two peoples, Ukrainians, Poles, and Krimli, was either destroyed or there was a beginning of their end. The first division of Poland, the first annexation of Crimea, and the destruction of the Zaporozhian siege. Therefore, we need really to go into depth of history to understand where does it come from. And frankly speaking, for me, I'm teaching at Kyiv Mohyla Academy, but I'm not an academic philosopher in a very usual sense of the term. I spend right now more time driving cars to the frontline areas, to Kherson Oblast, to Zaporizhia Oblast, to Kharkiv Oblast, than sitting in the libraries. And frankly speaking, it's at the same time good and bad. It's bad because I don't have really time to read a lot of books. But at the same time, we understand that we are living inside history. So history is not something that in the past for us. History is present, history is our future. And history is a bad thing. So history is not a good thing. History is, when Fukuyama was saying about the end of history, he was actually dreaming of something good, when there will be no tragedies, no wars. And this was, of course, a utopian, but a very kind utopia, right? So, of course, we need to understand that this history is repeating, and therefore this struggle is a struggle that has long and deep roots.
Of course, some of us were naively believed in the 1990s that we were living in a world in which history was not ending, but had become benign in a variety of ways. That is to say, the 1989, 1991 moments looked like such powerful, emancipatory moments that I think it would have been very hard then to imagine where we are now, some 30-something years later. I'm glad you brought up the 18th century and the idea of history repeating itself. What I was saying about imperial nostalgia, I think, is very powerful here with reference to Crimea. In the 18th century, the Russian Tsarina annexed Crimea, and for her, it was all about what it meant for Russia to be a great empire. I was taught, by the way, many years ago by my professor at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. This was Professor Omelyan Pritsak, who told me that when I was a student, that I must never refer to Catherine as Catherine the Great, because he said to me, Catherine, she was just so big like this.
This is not the only reason why we shouldn't call her Catherine.
He knew that too. But I think that the fact that of Putin's grabbing Crimea first, which was really the inauguration of this war, was a good example of history not randomly repeating itself, but very self-consciously, very purposefully repeating itself, in which Putin's imperial gambit was meant to echo Catherine's imperial gambit in the late 18th century.
Absolutely, and I think for those of you who are interested in maybe more sophisticated historical discussion, I've just published a podcast with Larry yesterday, and we discussed a lot of his books. And I think it's important to understand one thing also about the 18th century and the 19th century, is that there was misperception of Russia as by the Western intellectuals that you discuss, which I adore, by the way. I really like Voltaire and Diderot and all the others. But I think they did a mistake, and this mistake has been repeating all the time. And the mistake was that they perceived Russian Empire as a kind of a civilizing force in Eastern Europe. Whereas Russian Empire, even at that time, was a decivilizing force in Eastern Europe. They perceived Russians as good barbarians, which would take control over bad barbarians. So the Kirimli, Crimean Tatars, the Ukrainians, Poles were kind of bad barbarians that Russians would take care of. And I think that this pattern is still there. It is still present. It has been present in the 20th century. It is now maybe not in this way, but it is also present in the 21st century among certain people that would say, okay, but Eastern Europe will always be a mass, Ukraine will always be a mass. Let's have just totalitarian power that will just control it. Therefore, I do think that when we think about this war, we need to really think very, very deep. And you already mentioned this nostalgia. I think that you're absolutely right, in a sense that Russians really looking into the past. So let's make Russia great again is also their slogan. Some Ukrainian intellectuals, my friends, we actually came out with another slogan in Kramatorsk under the Russian bombings. Let's make Russia small again. Sorry for this joke, but actually, if you look deeper in what is happening, the reference to the past is a typical reference of, for example, Italian fascism. So what Mussolini tried to do is to revive the Roman Empire. What Hitler tried to do is to revive the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation of the medieval times. And Putin's Russia is trying to do the same. Therefore, this reference to Peter I and Catherine II and Stalin and the rest. But the point is that they really believe that it is not about nostalgia, that they really believe that they can break time, that they really believe that the de-imperializing history of the 20th century was a mistake by European empires. And therefore, European empires or former empires are suffering from this multiculturalism and everything. So they're very serious about that. They really think the 21st century will be again a century of empires. And we are living in a kind of this also democratic utopian maybe, post-Fukuyamist utopian, that, well, democracy will always win. We should know that democracy do not always win, that the history of humanity was mostly history of empires and not history of republics. And therefore we need to understand how dangerous a situation is. Because if Ukraine fails in this war, the whole idea of democracy fails. Because everybody will say, okay, but this authoritarian version of history is good. 21st century will be a century of new empires, Russian, Chinese, whatever else. And therefore, this struggle is very universal. I always repeat it. It's not only about Ukraine. It's about the wider world.
I think that what you say here is really very profoundly true, and that democracy itself is something that is at stake here and also problematized for us. We've come to realize, I would say, in the 1990s, the end of history moment, we really believed democracy had won with what now looks like great naivete. It would have been the counterpart to the world of the 1920s, following World War I, and the first end of empires, when people believed that democracy had won and that democracy defined the future. How wrong they were, they learned very quickly, right, within 20 years. I think that one of the lessons that we learn, partly from the Ukrainian the Russian-Ukrainian war, and partly from the ways in which different countries react to that war, is how volatile, how unstable, how uncertain democracy is in many, many different political contexts, including our own, that it's not a simple or stable thing. I do think that, I want to come back to what you said about the naivete of intellectuals who mistakenly understood Russia to be a civilizing force. In the 18th century, the intellectuals of the Enlightenment, who are such great interest to both of us, like Voltaire and Diderot, but also the intellectuals of the 20th century, who failed to take note of Stalin's genocidal crimes because they had so much confidence that Stalin was building a utopian socialism in Russia and that it was a model to be followed, not to be deplored. One of the things that I do wonder is whether Putin has finally taken the step beyond which it will be impossible for intellectuals of goodwill to fail to recognize what a disastrous force Russia is in the contemporary world, and how disastrously bad this war is, not only for Ukraine, but for the whole international order in which we imagine that we are living. And I have to say, I say this with some regret, part of our naivete in the 1990s is we believed, or I did, maybe you didn't in Kiev, that the end of the Soviet Union made it imaginable for Russia also to have European values, be part of Europe, represent a part of a new liberal world order.
We were not that naive.
Well, some of us were wishfully naive in that way in the 1990s, and it's become obviously very, very clear that that delusion is impossible to sustain.
So this actually leads into my next question, which I hope I can get relatively brief remarks on so that we can get one or two questions from the audience. However, when we talk about this repetition of history and engaging in this and like proactively trying to like look back on empire and build a new century of empire, this also, Russia engages in a lot of the same pseudo-historical narratives that previous regimes had engaged in. And so I'm very curious basically the big question from me is, it seems like right now, Ukraine is having more success in explaining to the rest of the world why these narratives are so problematic and so wrong. What are Ukrainians doing to make that understanding more widespread? Number one, to Volodymyr, but then number two, is that real? Is that really something that the rest of the world is having a better time understanding exactly how false the Russian narratives around Ukraine, around Ukrainians truly are?
So I do think that we explained better than before, but I do think that there is still a profound gap in understanding. In one of these gaps, I would say that it is still problematic for us Ukrainians to prove that Ukrainian history is a warning. And I really like the title of Tim Snyder's book about the Holocaust, Black Earth, Holocaust as History and Warning. I do think that this is also a task of historians to look at the past and see the warning, the signs of warning, what is happening. Like look at the 20th century. When did Europe really understand that there is something wrong with Stalinism? Except for some intellectuals in the 1920s, in 1930s. I would say that the key thing was about 1937, when the Great Purge started. But Ukrainian history shows that everything has started much earlier. We can say about the process on SVU in 1930. We can say about the arrest of Ukrainian leftist communist writers and the extermination in 1933, 1934. But we can go even earlier. We can say that Muravyov attack on Kiev in 1919 with huge massacre, with thousands and thousands of people killed by the very early Bolshevik war against independent Ukraine, was already a sign of it, right? So, and we can continue this history. We can continue deeper. Can we? Okay, if we could imagine that, like we discussed with Larry the story of Mazepa, how it was perceived, and if you're interested, go and listen to our podcast on explaining Ukraine. But how, for example, the Western writers, brilliant Western writers like Byron or Victor Hugo or others, were creating this image of Mazepa as very powerful, attractive, romantic, erotic, but they missed the whole point about the Poltava battle. Because they missed the point that the Poltava battle was about the start of this expansion of the Russian Empire, which will later destroy Crimean state, which will later destroy Polish state, and which in the end will create the Russian Empire as it was in the 19th century, as an empire which is the center of all the authoritarian practices. Like Fyodor Tuchev wrote his text in 1848, Russia and Revolution. Russia was the opposition to all the democratic revolutions of the time. This is what Russia is today, again. So we see that repetition. And I do think that we need to see, again, this universal value of Ukrainian struggle and universal value of Ukrainian victory. And warning, if Ukraine fails, what will happen to the other world? What will happen if the imperialistic, violence-based regimes will prevail?
So I would attack this, it's very fascinating and very, very important. I was going to attack it from a slightly different point of view. That is to say, I'm thinking of Putin's recent interview, the Tucker Carlson interview, in which he was given, shamefully given the opportunity to explain himself to a vast American public, and he spent his time talking about Sviatoslav the Brave, Volodymyr the Great, Yaroslav the Wise. He was living in the 10th and 11th century in a way that the interviewer thought was totally boring, right? And knew that his public would think was totally boring. And he's saying, why are you talking to us about this? And it was interesting to me because I talk about these. I'm teaching a course right now on the history of Ukraine at NYU. My students can recognize those names. They understand who they are and the role they play in Ukrainian history. Very interesting to me that Putin is almost willing to waste his big moment in the American media because the idea of capturing medieval Ukrainian history is so important to him. The idea, and it's one of the planes on which this war is being fought, the idea that Ukraine doesn't have a national history of its own, right? That it belongs to Russian history is a real reminder to us as historians of how dangerous the play of history and historical ideas can be.
Annexing the past is always a prelude to annexing territories. Let's not forget about it.
I think that's very well put, and I think it's an incredibly important and salient point that part of the goal is to capture that historic idea of Ukraine, not just the contemporary territory. If we have questions from the audience, we did try to build in a little bit of time in our conversation for that. But I do request that they're actually questions and not comments, because we don't have very much time for questions. So if we have any questions?
Okay, they can hear me. The reality is that Putin has plenty of time, and so to go ahead and waste his time in front of Tucker Carlson, he's not trying to impress Tucker. He's trying to make certain that Mike Johnson is the guy who you aren't talking to. The unfortunate aspect here is these people all know. What I'm asking you is, how do we get Mike Johnson and Donald Trump to actually hear what we're saying?
If the historian and philosopher have a take on convincing Trump and Johnson, have at it.
I would just say one word about this and then pass it to you, which is that this war has been an astonishing course in education for the American public. Ukraine, what Ukraine is, what Ukraine represents. And within America, there have always been very mixed feelings about different kinds of foreign commitments, going back to the post-imperial moment that followed the First World War and coming right up to the early 20th century. I think that this is an ongoing commitment by all of us to present this case in public and make clear what the stakes are. Understanding there will always be divisions. Mark Twain once said that the reason God created war was so that Americans would learn geography. And I think that that's been profoundly true during this war up to this point, but there's clearly a long way to go, and the longer the war, the harder it will be to sustain that kind of commitment of a public whose imagination is very fickle.
I think I will just repeat what I tried to say. I think that it's very important for us, at least what we are trying to say in Ukraine, is that Ukrainian struggle has a big global implications. And the world we are entering with Russian invasion is the world where we are shifting the normality. So normality in which we perceived ourselves after the end of the Second World War was a normality where violence is an exclusion, is an exception. Whereas what Russia is trying to say, what Russia is trying to build, it is the world where violence is normality. And the point where we enter this new world, and it is already under construction, the point where we enter this new world, it will become dangerous for everybody. So if violence is the first response, the first argument you make, that means that you are entering the world where all the violent crossing of borders are acceptable, admittable. When negotiations, talk, dialogue is just moved aside as something which is not worthy to do. So I do think that this is also the idea that keeps the Ukrainian struggle so universal.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. The first hand I saw was right here.
Thank you for this discussion. It's a pleasure to listen to each of you individually, but together somehow it's even more pleasurable. My question is fairly simple, and that's on purpose. There's a diverse audience gathered today on this very significant day to listen to the three of you speak on a very important subject. And my question, hopefully to guide you maybe towards a call to action to this audience, is what should we be all doing in this critical moment in time, particularly from your standpoints and viewpoints in history and philosophy? What should we, as people here in New York, gathered and then going home and doing our everyday things, what should we be doing?
Let people know how you feel about this. Let your congressperson know how you feel about this. Let your family and your friends know how you feel about this, and give money where you feel you can, through your church, through Razum, through whatever organization you feel good about contributing to. But talk to people and donate what you can.
Well, I think that what we all are trying to do in Ukraine is just to show this war as not an abstract war. So it's not just, we're trying to use words in a different way. We're trying to tell stories of people. Because I always say that Ukrainian struggle is a struggle of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And if you understand this in this way, you understand that this is a moment of what we call democracy. Well, this probably devalued term, but democracy for me is an understanding that you can do actually much more that you were expecting from yourself. And frankly speaking, I do think that there is a lot of parallels between Ukrainian society and American society. Because many times we talk about like the European vector of Ukraine, and it's all correct. But there is one interesting thing in this entrepreneurship spirit of Ukrainians. That this entrepreneurship spirit is very, very similar to the American entrepreneurship spirit, but it goes way, way above and way beyond the questions of economics and everything. This entrepreneurship spirit of citizenship. So we are very creative in the way how we perceive our citizenship. And this you can judge from very different regions. The regions in which people are really living on the edge, really living on the frontier, really living under constant shelling. And they do not stop to be citizens. They do not stop to be people who feel their responsibility. Therefore, for me, Ukrainian example is the example that says that democracy is not doomed, that democracy is a good thing, that democracy is not about procedures, elections, fight for power. It's about the feeling of a citizen that he or she can do much more than he or she could expect it from yourself at the beginning. And if we look at that way, in a way, Ukraine reinvents democracies, like looks right now in the point where democracy starts, or the spirit of republic starts, the spirit of republic where you understand that you're not passive. You're not, your situation does not depend only on actions of somebody else. In this way, I do feel that we're creating this image, we're going away from this postmodern era where the values are not perceived seriously, when everything just goes into cynicism. We go to things that are authentic, that are real, that are true. And I do think that sharing this experience here in this country is very important, because it can help us both here and in Europe, and reinvent what we call democracy. Frankly speaking, I would tell you that I drive many people coming from abroad. I drive them literally to places on the front line because they want it. And why they want it? Because they are seeking this authenticity that is present in Ukraine. And this authenticity is about this spirit of that impossible is nothing, and that you are stronger than you feel, and that your freedom means that you are responsible for things that you thought are dependent on somebody else.
Thank you. And just to tell everybody an example of that strength is that Volodymyr was in Kherson on Monday, and he's currently in New York City on Friday to share those thoughts with you, which is something that is unbelievable. So thank you very much to Volodymyr for making it all the way here. Thank you, Professor Wolf, for making it here.
you very much, gentlemen. That was really wonderful, and thank you for all that you continue to do every single day to spread the truth and to move the disinformation away. We really appreciate it, and I know that our audience does as well. So thank you. Next, we have the pleasure of welcoming Commissioner Bevza Segos. He is the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He is the DEC's longest-serving commissioner, having been appointed in 2015 by Governor Cuomo. Under his leadership, the DEC has made strides in addressing key environmental issues like climate change and sustainable resource management. Commissioner Segos has traveled to Ukraine. He's taken time off personally to help deliver supplies to the front lines. He's a former U.S. Army, I don't know what you call it, soldier. And as part of his relationship with going to Ukraine, he established a sister city relationship between Albany, New York, and Bucha, Ukraine. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Segos as he shares his thoughts with us today.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you all. It is truly an honor to be here today amongst some very esteemed guests. We have Consul General, Ambassador. Good to see both, and really thank you for having me. And also to the soldiers in the room, thank you for what you did. Please, thank them. So I'm here today on behalf of Governor Hochul. Governor is in Washington today, meeting with fellow governors, and couldn't be here to address you. But just to deliver a message from her, New York stands with Ukraine, and has since day one. We know what Ukraine has gone through. We experienced, of course, our own attack in New York 20 plus years ago. We know what it's like to be under attack. So we extend our brotherhood to the people of Ukraine. So you're probably wondering, Kathy, thank you for the warm introduction. You're probably wondering, why is an environmental commissioner talking in front of you today? Yes, we care about the planet. We do our work here in New York to protect our endangered species, water, climate change, energy issues, and everything else. But for me, I'm really not here as commissioner. I'm here as a New Yorker, and somebody who sat down at my television, my computer, 2 years ago, with memories of 10 years ago. I remember the images of the Donetsk airport and the fighting that went on at that time, and I began to think to myself, that is a very unstable situation that isn't going to get any better, and lo and behold, of course, 2022 happened. So I'm a little bit, I think by nature, impatient. I don't like to sit on the sidelines generally, if I can, and I felt that I had to do more than just rage tweet or speak out in public about this here in the States. I began to ask myself, is there something more that I could do to help? So I'll just give a little bit about my story, where it took me, maybe tie into the question, who asked the question about what we can do? Was it you, sir? Okay, maybe I have a thought. If it's worth something, you'll let me know. And then if we get some time, we'll take a couple questions. I did link up with a great group called Ukraine Focus. Mutual friend introduced me to a former USAID assistant administrator who was planning to go over there. So I linked up with him. I did some fundraising and went over in September of 2022 to bring ambulances from Slovakia all the way through Mukachevo, Lviv, Kyiv, and ultimately to Kharkiv, where I spent some time. We brought several hundred the so-called IFACs, these advanced first aid kits, for soldiers with the Territorial Defense Force, the 127th, which is pin I'm wearing right now, 127th out of Kharkiv, which had just prevailed against the Russians, obviously pushing the Russians out of the oblast. and shocking the world, showing the world, of course, what Ukraine's spirit was all about, what their ingenuity was all about. Of course, on the heels of these incredible victories and defenses in Kyiv and Bucha and beyond, this defense that stirred us all. So getting there, having a chance to spend some time in the trenches with some of the soldiers, eating on the front lines, we ended up in a bunker that had just been vacated forcibly, with some soup and tea and food still left on tables in this bunker system, about 1.5 miles from the Russian border. We delivered all of the ambulances, we delivered the first aid kits, and ultimately brought some help to this unit. The second time I went was March of last year. We did about the same thing. We traveled all the way from Slovakia all the way through the country and ultimately into the Donetsk. We're in a village called New York, Donetsk, which has another story for another speaker. But I found some synchronicity there with my current life. Had a chance to talk to the environment minister while I was there, who happened to be here in New York. So we were doing a Zoom call from New York. He was in my New York, I was in his. We were helping out the 110th at the time, which is, as everyone knows, was engaged in the fight for Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and many other battles. And then just a couple of months ago, I was there again, doing much of the same work. But each time I began trying to find resources, people that could help, could do more than just deliver ambulances, working with our colleagues over there. So we brought Northwell Health. Are you in Staten Island? Have you been to Staten Island at all? Staten Island has a wonderful treatment program at Northwell Health. For some of the soldiers have been coming into New York, which is fantastic. Actually, President Zelensky was there back in September. So we brought Northwell Health over there. We brought them in to help with battlefield medicine, starting to look at the full system from battlefield triage all the way to superhumans, and providing some medical advice as to how they could improve their operations. And Ian had a chance to go into the presidential office as well, and present our recommendations about improvements. So those are some of my trips over there. Honestly, probably the best experience of my life. I've been fortunate to be in a really important job here in New York State. Have had, well, this is except for my kids and my wife, of course, but you know, being a part of something over there. One of the professors was talking about, you know, you finding something. We are all obviously finding something in our grand journeys. What I found over there when I first went was a love of America, which may seem a little strange. But this is September 2022, and I felt this incredible outpouring of love for democracy, for the ideas, for the visions of this country, and for the help, the early help that we were giving to the people of Ukraine. This feeling of people's about to lose everything, that's when they're most appreciative of what they have and most defensive of what they have. And ultimately their spirits are at the highest. So I think I experienced something in my trips over there that gave me hope for us all. The Ukrainians having incredible bravery, fighting through incredible trauma, and yet even in the worst conditions, seeing some of the damage to many villages and loss of life, that people could find time to give hugs and smile and laugh and tell stories and share time with strangers from abroad. So I truly valued my time over there. I also really wanted to make sure I was delivering some results here, that this wasn't just a commissioner from DEC in New York traveling over there to help out, but in fact we were doing something institutionally here to strengthen the bonds. So the sister city relationship was very important with the city of Albany, which is our state's capital. And of course, doing some work with the city of Syracuse as well, the police department, city of Syracuse, where my brother-in-law is a cop, moving first aid gear and bulletproof material from them to to the police departments in Kyiv. So I'm grateful for the way that we were greeted over there, and I think Ukraine obviously has shown the world what it can do with just a little bit of help. So that's why I went. But I think there's something a little bit bigger that keeps me engaged, and probably that I felt in the beginning, is this feeling, and the professors were talking about this, that we're truly at an inflection point right now. I mean, you can see two different futures at this very moment that could emerge from this war. One in which we fail to stand up enough defenses collectively to help Ukraine prevail. And then where does that lead, of course? And this is the choir, I'm preaching to the choir here, so you are all steeped in this. But I truly worry about that future, thinking about not just this year, but my kids in the next 20, 30 years. What are they going to have? What kind of world will they inherit when we would have let a democratic ally down, and they would have fought valiantly and been ultimately steamrolled by this juggernaut, these Russians? The ripple effects from that, I believe, are extraordinary, and we would feel it on a regular basis right here in New York, right here in our daily lives. You care about climate change, right? You care about the next pandemic. You care about the outbreak of war somewhere else around the world. You let this happen, and all the institutions we have built since the 1940s, all of the alliances, all the strength that we have gained as a world to collectively solve problems, United Nations, NATO, business, corporate alliances, everything else, all of that is eroded. So I for one, I saw that, and it drove me to do more than what I typically do on a daily basis, because I didn't want that future, and I know you don't either. On the other side, this other future that I think we all want is the continuation of the work that we have been doing for 75 years since we prevailed in World War II. And that is the grand experiment of democracy. It's not a static condition. It is an experiment because we try hard every single day to improve our lot and to have freedoms, cultural expressions, religious expressions, travel, trade, happiness, family, just pure choice. All of those things, that's the future that I want. I know that's the future that New York wants, that our nation wants here, and I know that's what Ukraine wants as well. So I believe right now, I truly, firmly believe it, this is one of the most important moments in history right now. And it's not because I think Ukraine could win this war without any guidance from us, but they need our help, right? They need the resources, they need the munitions. We, the West, likely miscalculated for many years about the need to have armaments on hand in the event of a war, right? We were looking at different things. The professors talked about it, right? The hubris coming out of the 1990s. Perhaps our focus elsewhere around the world in the time being. But we're now at this point where we have this chance to get it right. And this is just me talking. This is not the official position of the state of New York, okay? But Congress has to get this done, okay? I don't know why one would run for office if one weren't to see this moment in time and act on it with a level of vigor and sincerity that is needed. Because the people of Ukraine are paying for it right now. We will all pay for it in the future, and every single one of them knows it. So Senator Schumer's over there today with a delegation. I'm hoping that he could bring stories back, not just to New York, but to America. And I'm hoping he can bring stories back to the people of Congress. And I will say this, the good people of Congress. Let us hope that they have the wisdom to see this moment for what it is, so that our Ukrainian soldiers who have been fighting for all of us are no longer at risk. What can you do? Well, I think the professors got it. This moment demands all of us, not all of us driving ambulances to the front, that I intend to do again. I will be there. But it demands all of us do something. And I know all of you in this room will do something. Everyone in this building will do something. The amazing work of the Institute will help to carry out the importance of this moment. But it's more than just Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called these days. It really is citizen activism, and that's what fixes problems. And it's not giving in to failures, right? When you think you've hit a wall, you have to climb over it or somehow blast through it. And that's where we are right now. So every single one of you should seize this moment and be a ripple in your communities, in your society, so that we can get this change done together. So I really want to thank you for this chance to represent Governor Hochul here today, and to be amongst such incredible leaders of this world, and the soldiers, of course, who've come here. It's really, truly an honor, and I'll just leave you with one thing. Slava Ukraini? Okay. Thank you. Sure, questions? Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions. Of course, the Consul General is going to speak after me. I'm very eager to hear what he has to say, but take any questions in the meantime.
USHouse.gov 202-225 is the beginning of the goddamn address. Last four, find out it's on the website.
Okay. House.gov.
By the way, what does the lease do?
I'm only a state official. I couldn't tell you.
She represents upstate.
Indeed. Let us put our faith in people making the right decision at this point, but it's going to take us all asking for that. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Commissioner Sagas, I happen to work for DC Region 2, and I read you were in Ukraine, and I said, what that guy is doing there? I just didn't know.
Why are you not at the office right now?
And you know you're resigning soon, too.
I did. I am resigning.
Anyway, that's not what I'm talking to. I'm talking to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for what you did for Ukraine and what you're doing for Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. DEC, we're everywhere. Look out. Keeping the environment clean. Protecting democracy. Any other questions? Someone know? Was that a question? Sorry. No. Okay. Kathy, it's yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And now we have the pleasure of hearing from General Counsel of the Republic of Poland in New York, Adrian Kubicki. Adrian is a really amazing friend of Ukraine and of the Ukrainian Institute, so we are forever grateful for your partnership and for the partnership of your staff and your country. Mr. Kubicki is a diplomat, a sociologist, a former journalist. He joined the Polish Foreign Service in 2019 at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he received a consular title and was appointed to a 4-year term as director of the Polish Cultural Institute in New York, became the Consul General in 2020, is that correct? Yes. So he's, again, a very loyal friend, a great person. He has a lovely family, and we welcome him and his remarks this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ambassadors, Commissioner. I have to say that, and I say it very rarely, that this is difficult to speak after such an engaging speech given by yourself. But you started on a personal note, so I allow myself to start on a personal note too. Katie very kindly mentioned some of the points of my bio, but skipped a very important part. Right before I joined the diplomatic services, I worked for an airline, for LOT Polish Airlines. And one of the greatest projects that we were running, I was head of communications, was actually vastly extending a wonderful network of connections pretty much all over Ukraine. Not only to Kiev, Odessa, but also to Zaporozhye, to Kharkiv, obviously, and everywhere, Donetsk as well. And that gave me personally an opportunity to travel to Ukraine so many times, to see, obviously, it was after 2014, but still, the Ukrainian nation and the country was in its rebirth, the most beautiful time of development, chasing up, obviously, the European Union, the West, so fast that we wanted to capture that and build that connection, that give Ukrainian people that connectivity. And you could sense already at that time, for instance, in Kharkiv, the war was actually over there, not that far away, probably at that time 160 kilometers from where we had the press conference, established the connections. But no one had any doubts. Where is the future and what is the direction for Ukraine and for Ukrainian people? And then obviously everyone has memories from 2 years ago when it was actually a nighttime here, a day before, when we watched TV, and we couldn't believe that just in that 1 second, such a serious attempt of ruin all of that is happening. What amazed all of us is that resistance and resilience of the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian nation. And we struggled that night. Obviously, it was happening somewhere far away from where we are right now. There are so many more important places on the map of even our posts, diplomatic posts all over the world, in DC and anywhere else. But we ask ourselves and our colleagues at the consulate the very same question: what can we do, and what should we do? And this is actually how our beautiful relation with the Institute, with the Ukrainian Institute started. We called them, we didn't really know them, but we called them early in the morning, asking if they have a flag that we can fly over our window that very morning. And they did. They borrowed us, we probably never gave it back, but they borrowed us that flag, and probably Polish consulate have became the first consulate, first foreign consulate where we had this Ukrainian flag flying. And ever since, we were trying to get engaged with the community, with the Ukrainian community. But I think something that represents what Poland stood for, and it's still standing for these past 2 years, being in a way the advocate for the Ukrainian people, for their needs, and for that understanding of what the Russia's attempt really is. Because our belief was that we're obviously have that natural human sympathy for the people. By the way, over these 2 years, Poland served probably over 10 million of Ukrainian refugees. Most of them, vast majority of them, went back to Ukraine the first moment it was safe for them to go, because they love their country. But that many people crossed the border with Poland and found shelter at some point of this 2 years journey. But it was more than that. We knew from the very beginning that Ukraine and Ukrainian people fight not only for their freedom, for their independence, for their self-determination, but they are actually fighting on our behalf. Because Poland understands that, and this is something that we're saying out loud from the very beginning, this war hasn't started actually in the 2022. we believe that it hasn't even started in 2014. It started, some people say, in 2008, when Russia attempted attacks on Georgia. But you can even go back in the past, and you'll see the continuation, a certain path for restoring, rebuilding this Russian imperialism, imposing this attempt to impose it with the brutality, forcefully. Since the war broke out, one of our projects, obviously, many media were reaching out to speak also to us, because we kind of found ourselves at the edge, being the most eastern exposed NATO member and the European Union member. And I gave probably, within the first 6 months of war, I gave probably around 100 different interviews with American media outlets. And they said, like, why Poland is so much engaged? And I was always saying, and I feel that it was somehow eye-opening for many of these media representatives, these journalists, that Poland itself, very similarly to Ukraine, spent, out of 300 years of recent history, spent over 250 years under Russian slavery in different forms. It had different name tags, but the principle for Russia remained, and it still remains. And we have to understand that hasn't changed. And this is a process. And if Ukraine fail, if we allow not sending Ukraine enough help so they can continue their brave fight, they don't need our troops, you don't need our troops, you don't need our blood. You're just screaming as loud as you can, give us weapons, give us equipment, give us means, and we will continue that fight. If we fail with providing that, it will really ruin the global order, not for next 5 years or 10 years, probably for centuries. This is the edge of a very serious global conflict, which is already global, even though some people try to believe that this is only a local affair. But quick recap with the history. Where the Second World War broke out, where the First War broke out, it is actually usually happening in the Central and Eastern Europe. This place on earth that both Ukraine and Poland and other countries are located. Very fragile, very sensitive. We must not allow this history to repeat itself. And there's obviously various ways how we can keep on being engaged. There are politicians. I don't know if some of you heard the speech that our foreign minister gave yesterday at the Security Council at the UN. I think it was very heavy, but one of the premises that he was actually referring to each and every false lying point that was made by Russian ambassador about the history and about the reasons behind the war. And it was very accurate, but I think one of the most important premises he left us with is that Russia is not invincible. This is what he said. And we have to understand that Russia lost many wars, and this one they're going to lose as well. And after wars, usually reforms happen in Russia. And I think that this is the work, what we do, and our work should be with these words and with these premises in mind. We worked in many different fields. As I said, we engaged with communities. The Polish consulate hosted many events, including those that were giving a chance to give a better understanding of Ukraine and our region of the world. We had meetings with Volodymyr Rafayenko, the writer, another writer, Stanislav Aseyev. These people went through the hell of Russian occupation, and they were the first hand witnesses, and we had many guests of different origins to give them a chance to better understand what is happening in our region of the world. We started a wonderful collaboration with Kind Deeds Foundation, the foundation that President Zelensky visited on Staten Island, with brave soldiers that we pay so much respect to, and that collaboration has been great. And you know what they say, that the image is worth 1,000 words. seeing these gentlemen coming to America wounded for their rehabilitation, for the treatments, and then immediately going back to Ukraine, and many of them just go right back to fight, is something that is so uplifting and gives us so much impression, obviously, but also so much inspiration, and that this is beyond priceless. And also, Polish community here in America is very much engaged. Polish organizations, we're trying to count it, it's really hard to count it, but we believe that they collected altogether over a couple of millions of dollars for different causes to support Ukraine and Ukrainian people, also including refugees, obviously, all over. But something that we should also talk, and I think that this is something that probably reshaped the mission of the Ukrainian Institute here of America, is how we continue, or even maybe how we can use this as a platform to promote the Ukraine, how to promote the culture, such an enriched culture that is giving us so much, contributes to so much to the culture of the entire Europe. How we build that platform, how we help, and this is another part of the mission, very difficult, maybe not as engaging as helping people, but equally important, how we help Ukraine to preserve their heritage. We know what happens, basically Polish people, right? Warsaw burned to the ground. Most of our cities were rebuilt from scratch. We didn't have photos, we didn't have footage at that time. We had to start from the scratch, and it was a huge effort. In Ukraine, we're trying to help in the process of digitalization of the art pieces and some of the heritage that is being there still untouched. Just across the street, Polish lady, ahead of the department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, started the fundraising and actually collected many organizations all across the globe that started to contribute financially to support that cause. So that this is another proof that it starts from a single person that wants to be engaged and wants to keep being engaged. And I think that we're going to win this war along with Ukraine and Ukrainian people for as long as we will keep fighting, rooting and supporting Ukraine at least one day beyond the Russian aggression. We know that they have means to continue that aggression for unnamed amount of time, maybe longer than we expected. But this is why we should keep being engaged. We're here 2 years after the war. We know that in some circles this support is softening. Please use your voice. This is something that we're appealing to our community in Poland. Write a letter to your congressman, write a letter to your senator. Be vocal, however you can, even if it's just X or Twitter or Facebook. If you can't do anything else, this is enough, as long as you're vocal. Because Americans need to understand what this war is all about. It's not about the Ukraine. It's not even about the Europe. It's about the global order and whether democracy wins over tyranny. So to me, it's been a pleasure to work with the Institute and being a frequent guest here at these beautiful premises. And I'm so glad that we are having here a full room of people equally engaged. It is a pleasure. Commissioner started that idea of having a Q&A, so if you have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. If you don't, I'll be hanging out around here for a while, so please don't hesitate and reach out. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Slava Ukraini. We're gonna win.
Thank you so much. We love having you here. The Polish community has been incredibly supportive, and so always welcome. I'm not going to talk long because we need to move on to our next special guest. I am very pleased to introduce Ambassador Martin Kimani, the permanent representative of the Republic of Kenya to the United Nations. The ambassador has served in that role since December 2020. Previously, he served as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center and as a special envoy for countering violent extremism in Kenya. Joining him is Dr. Olena Lennon, adjunct professor of political science and national security at the University of New Haven. Dr. Lennon teaches courses on U.S. foreign and defense policy, international relations, conflict resolution, and American government. She also serves as co-editor of an online scholarly forum, Eyes on Donbass, Politics, Places, and People at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. On a personal note, I would like to just mention that we're thrilled not only to have the ambassador, but we have someone who broke the internet in the house. Some of you may recall on February 24th, 2022, that the ambassador made very powerful remarks in support of Ukraine. And if you would look at the screen, we'd like to play those now, and then we'll invite the ambassador and Dr. Lennon to the front.
To the permanent representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. We meet tonight on the brink of a major conflict in Ukraine. The diplomacy we urged on the 17th of February is failing. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine stands breached. The Charter of the United Nations continues to wilt under the relentless assault of the powerful. In one moment, it is invoked with reverence by the very same countries who then turn their backs on it in pursuit of objectives diametrically opposed to international peace and security. In the last two meetings on the situation in Ukraine and the buildup of forces by the Russian Federation, Kenya urged that diplomacy be given a chance. Our cry was not heeded, and more importantly, the Charter's demand for states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered has been profoundly undermined. Today, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine has been effected. Kenya is gravely concerned by the announcement made by the Russian Federation to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine as independent states. In our considered view, this action and announcement breaches the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We do not deny that there may be serious security concerns in these regions, but they cannot justify today's recognition of these regions as independent states, not when there are multiple diplomatic tracks available and underway that have the ability to offer peaceful solutions. Mr. President, this situation echoes our history. Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. We rejected irredentism and expansionism on any basis, including racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural factors. We reject it again today. Kenya registers its strong concern and opposition to the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. We further strongly condemn the trend in the last few decades of powerful states, including members of this Security Council, breaching international law with little regard. Multilateralism lies on its deathbed tonight. It has been assaulted today as it has been by other powerful states in the recent past. We call on all members to rally behind the Secretary General in asking him to rally us all to the standard that defends multilateralism. We also call on him to bring his good offices to bear to help the concerned parties resolve this situation by peaceful means. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Kenya's respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what a powerful speech. I've watched it many times, and I always learn new things from it. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Ukrainian Institute of America, for inviting me back. I wish the circumstances would have been different, but here we are. It's an honor for me to moderate this conversation with Ambassador Kimani. When Lydia first reached out to me and she said, "Let me play you this clip," and I said, "Oh, I know exactly who Ambassador Kimani is." As a matter of fact, the fact that that video went viral is further testament to how powerful and how meaningful that and timeless that message is. And I'm pretty sure that I'm responsible for a great number of those clicks, as I played that video in my classes. Every single class, new group I teach has to watch that video, because I think that as a scholar, as a teacher of international relations and conflict resolution, I think that what you said in that message is one of the most powerful and articulate messages of the trade-offs necessary in the name of long-term stability and security. As you so rightfully said, no one is happy with their borders. Nobody's happy, perfectly happy with their political situations or with their neighbors. But the importance of upholding international law and respecting sovereignty of other countries is precisely in the name of long-term stability and security that benefits all of us. And with that, I wanted to ask my first question to you is, given your experience in the United Nations, and specifically in knowing the region that you represent, I know that all analogies are flawed, but some are useful. If you were to draw any comparisons between African nations, Kenya in particular, East Africa, colonial and post-colonial experiences, if you were to draw any similarities between the struggle the post-colonial struggle for independence in Africa and the Russia-Ukraine war that you have witnessed in the last 10 years. What do you think are some of the lessons that the world may be missing from the African experience and then what you're seeing in the current war that Russia is waging against Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much, Professor, and good afternoon to all of you. Sergei, my colleague, Ukrainian colleague, Christina, my Danish colleague, Consul General Commissioner. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here. I assume that the majority of a significant number of you are Ukrainian, and I want to register here my condolences to any of you who have lost family members or who have been dispossessed or otherwise seriously hurt by this illegal invasion. I am very sorry, and I would like to express that on my own behalf and on behalf of Kenya, because that is the least we can do. I also want, before I answer your question, to say how much I admire a country that is so determined to defend its freedom and its sovereignty. And ultimately, Ukraine reminds us, I think, that you can never take your freedom for granted, and that ultimately you hope that you have enough spirit, enough belief in your nation, that when it is threatened so illegally and violently, that you have the courage and the integrity to stand up and defend it. And so for that reason, I admire what Ukraine has done and is doing, and I hope that it prevails. On what lessons, I think the biggest lesson for me is that when aggression is unaddressed, it doubles down. And when empires, countries that have an appetite for empire, such as the empire that ruled Kenya, the British Empire, or the French empires in Africa, is that it took tremendous determination by Africans to actually fight for their independence. And a parallel is that we always needed the help of the world. Our fight for independence was not solely us fighting. We had to hold hands with other countries that recognized that our fight for independence in some way was their fight for independence and for freedom. I think this is a powerful lesson, that when you have a country that is fighting for the right principles, and that those principles have necessitated it to arm itself and fight, undertake an armed struggle, is that that kind of armed struggle for that principle belongs not just to that country, but to all people who actually believe in that principle. So when we say we believe in the independence and territorial integrity of Kenya, it means that we must stand with those who are fighting for their independence and territorial integrity, because we too can be aggressed by a powerful state that decides for one reason or the other that they want to possess some part of our territory or to bring us under their control. So I think a parallel, and I think this has been done too little, is to connect the wars of independence in Africa and generally the global South with the struggle that Ukraine is waging now. What Ukraine is doing is not merely fighting for, as is so popularly said, for the West, but really fighting for principles that go far beyond the West. And I think that point needs to be made much more frequently.
Thank you. On that note, you know, it's really interesting, what you said about universal values and these principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity applying to all countries, again, regardless of how they inherited those borders. And I know the experience of East Africa is particularly recent, and those traumas of war still resonate very much so. And with you being, having this post in the United Nations, and in the message, you encouraged countries to look forward, not backwards, and to uphold international law, whatever we think of it, if we like it or don't like it. The importance of upholding international law is precisely future-oriented. And we know that the future consists of actions and inactions of today, right? So there's certain decisions that have to be made, but there's also a lot of indecisions. So what is not being done right now to kind of incrementally get to the future that we want? As you encourage us to be future-oriented and not look backwards, is there anything that you see amongst your colleagues in these various platforms in which you participate, decisions that are not being made and actions that are not being taken that will stack up to create the future that we want?
Oh, I could list them for days. I could list them for days. Often I feel as a diplomat that the diplomats who came before us were greater diplomats than we are. They built great institutions. They showed foresight. They were very bold. It was a different time. But I think we are not stepping up to the plate. I see some of my colleagues here, and I think that all of them who are here agree with me. The peace and security architecture of the United Nations, principally the Security Council, needs to change. It's that simple. And we're going to be unable to really protect global peace as long as the Security Council is constituted as it is. It should be against the rules to be fighting a war and to also be able to use a veto to affect the course of the same war. The use of the veto is a grave responsibility. It was given for two reasons. Of course, these countries were the victors of a great war. And so there was a real politic about the veto. But the veto is also a responsibility to the global community, to everybody else. And right now, the veto is doing more to shield actions that are illegal under the UN Charter, more than to further the Charter. So we do have to undertake Security Council reform. This year is a really important year. We are negotiating a pact for the future. And in September, those of you who are New Yorkers, when all of you get very impatient because of the traffic, when all the presidents and prime ministers come, we're going to be having a summit of the future. And right now, we are not showing the ambition and the boldness to truly take on this challenge of transforming the United Nations and transforming the Security Council. That's one big, big thing that is not happening. I think the second thing that is that we're not doing enough of is to pursue a global financial trade and investment architecture that truly takes on poverty and attempts to eliminate poverty. Poverty creates so many domino effects. And if you look today at Africa, at so many of the poor countries, whether they're in the Sahel or in the Horn, that poverty, directly or indirectly, is a cause of major conflicts. It creates vacuums of governance, vacuums of humanitarian response. And inside these vacuums of governance, hostile actors are stepping in. And today, you have multiple countries interfering in the affairs of African states, principally members of the Permanent Five of the United Nations, and prominently so Russia across the Sahel. And so if we're unable to uplift Africa and enable Africa and other poorer parts of the world to prosper on their own industry, on their own effort, then you're going to find that, in fact, the appetite for conquest, the appetite for interference is only going to increase. So we need to do more of that. I'll leave it at those two. And there's something about, you know, how do you express bravery as a diplomat? This is one of the more challenging things, and you're a student of international relations. Us diplomats have extremely comfortable life. We don't have to do anything. We just sort of, you know, there's no performance review that if you don't change the world, you're doing a bad job. So I think it's for you in the audience to really take your power amongst your representatives, amongst your governments, and demand more of people such as myself so that we're able to actually deliver what we're supposed to deliver.
Thank you. I think diplomats do a lot. It's just it's hard to measure things that didn't happen. But in terms of preventative measures, I think, like you said, putting diplomacy over military solutions ultimately leads to better outcomes, but they're hard to measure. And I think as an indicator-obsessed culture, sometimes we lose sight of things that didn't happen and who we should really credit for that. So I credit you, and my students do too, otherwise they don't pass. My last question, probably taking advantage of my role as a moderator, and I don't know if we'll have time for questions from the audience, but I assume there will be many. On the last note that you made in terms of poverty and global poverty and how much that is a problem that doesn't stay in one country. And I know we've seen that with grain shortages and Russia blockading grain exports out of Ukraine, and how much particularly people in Africa have been affected by that. Yet at the same time, what we hear in terms of public opinion and some of the popular narratives that resonate in the region that you represent as a result of Russia's influence operations, that there is still not the same level of condemnation of Russia's aggression. And in some ways, there are still sizable contingents that express sympathy with what Russia presents as a anti-colonial war. Their narrative is that the Russians are fighting Western colonialism in Ukraine, as reflected in NATO advancement and moving its infrastructure to Ukraine's border. So we know that those are all information operations that the Russians have perfected in certain regions, and they do resonate as far as we know. What is your assessment of where public opinion is, maybe in East Africa in particular, in terms of why do those messages resonate? And if you believe that the West could be doing a better job with communicating the truth or sort of galvanizing nations around the world around this cause?
Yeah, well, yes, you are right. That story that the war in Ukraine is a sort of reaction to Western aggression is indeed resonating. The greatest reason for that is, frankly, the construction of the West as it's constructed, and especially its most powerful countries have been extremely inconsistent in their approach to international law. They have not, to put it frankly, they've been very hypocritical. Sorry, I have to be slightly undiplomatic. So on one hand, you will see many of the most powerful Western countries, when it comes to Ukraine, preaching international law, preaching about the UN Charter. Then they'll turn right around and shutter it for themselves. And so all you have to do is not false propaganda, is say these are double standards. These are double standards. And these double standards actually undermine support for Ukraine. They undermine support for Ukraine. The lack of consistency in application of international law, international humanitarian law, by some of the greatest champions of Ukraine creates a vulnerability that is then exploited by this message. That's number one. And I've seen the Ukrainian government and leadership really try and respond to this, and try and say it's about us, it's about Ukraine. Yeah, Ukraine is Ukraine. Yes, you have friends and supporters, but we're Ukraine and recognize us directly. And so I have seen the foreign minister President Zelensky, and other leaders really engaging African countries and trying to make that case for Ukraine. And I think that is something that is effective when it is done consistently. But of course, Ukraine is also in the middle of a war. Is also in the middle of a war. That's a lot to do, to fight a war and at the same time carry out a global diplomatic effort. So I have every sympathy that this is not easy for Ukraine to do. And a lot of us have discovered a lot these last 2 years. One, many of us, I knew about Ukraine, but I really didn't know about Ukraine. So we discovered things such as Ukraine is an agricultural superpower. We discovered that Ukrainian grain and fertilizers are a big deal to many of our farmers. I had no idea. I'm a city person, yeah, so I didn't know. We discovered that Ukraine, when Russia talks about its past relationship with Africa against colonialism, well then Ukraine has completely the same legitimate Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union had a relationship with African countries, well, Ukraine was one of them, right? So there are lots of stories that need to be told to push back against this, propaganda. And I think Kenya hears Ukraine. I think the majority of Kenyans believe that Ukraine has been illegally invaded and that the fight Ukraine is carrying out is justified. And the story just needs to keep being told. But the truth, yes, the propaganda is powerful and is pervasive. It's on social media, and it has had some effect. As you've seen, a number of African countries have tended to quote unquote be neutral when it comes to the votes. And I think it's a consequence of that propaganda.
Thank you for your honesty and for such a undiplomatic. I think it's very diplomatic to give such honest, transparent answers. I could keep going. You just touched my favorite subject, Soviet history. So I have unlimited questions, but I do want to give other people an opportunity to ask questions. Lydia, do we have time for questions? We do.
Why not?
Else can I ask one? I don't think they need it.
Well,
people in the other room.
Oh, that's how that works. I'm going to take us back to 1993 or thereabouts. So the Soviet Union has now fallen apart. We have Ukraine with a whole collection of ICBMs. And the exchange was that Ukraine would go ahead and dismantle the ICBMs under international watch, and the international community would go ahead and protect Ukraine. What is the international community supposed to say now?
Well, I think when it comes to, I don't want to speak for the countries that are supporting Ukraine, but it does seem to me that a lot more could have been done a decade ago or even further back. In fact, what has happened was a sliding scale of impunity that allowed an escalation that led to an invasion. So to say that Ukraine has been failed by the global institutions and the international community, I think is not an exaggeration. I think it is true. Ukraine has been let down. And even as Ukraine receives strong support today, I think we still need to look back and say it did not need to go this way. And when there was a breakage of any breach of a country's sovereignty by a neighboring country should be met with very clear and firm response. And when it is not, it encourages a doubling down that can lead to far more dangerous consequences. I wonder if we have learned from what has happened to Ukraine. We will see in the years to come. And a lot of it will have to do with the outcome of this war. I think it'll teach the world a lesson that it needs to really learn.
Well, I'd like to thank, oh, I'm sorry.
Are we talking about the Budapest Memorandum? In 1993, I think, was the Budapest Memorandum, but that was a security guarantee, which is a very vague one, but that was the UK, France, and the United States, right? It wasn't the entire European community. And that was on the, with proviso that it gave up its nuclear weapons, right? So I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, or have we said what needs to be said?
Sergey.
I need to help out, not because Martin doesn't know that, but because it's my responsibility. Well, first of all, the Budapest Memorandum was not about guarantees, it was about assurances. And we're not going into the linguistic equilibristics, but assurances and guarantees are different things. And then next thing, neither France nor China are parties to Budapest Memorandum. It's part of this mythology. So the Budapest Memorandum was all about assurances and consultations. What happens right now, literally now, including today and the day before today and 2 weeks ago, we are signing the security treaties with countries, including the United Kingdom, Denmark, other. And those treaties, unlike Budapest Memorandum, they have specific obligations and long-term commitments, including military and financial ones. So I think that we learned our lessons. Let us not go back to Budapest Memorandum. It's a very sad part of the history. My private opinion, it was not about Ukraine. It was about collective West willing to remove the nuclear arsenals from the territory of Ukraine so they would be controlled, and Russia was able to convince the West that they would control the nuclear arsenals. It was also about how to launch the process of Central European countries, including Poland, joining NATO. Because you have to remember that as a result of signing the Budapest Memorandum, the foreign minister Kozyrev of Russia immediately traveled from Budapest to Brussels for the NATO meeting, where the process, the effective process of approximation and eventual joining by the Central European countries, the NATO was launched. So it was a very complex deal, and if you read the declassified letters, they were declassified like 3 years ago, 2 years ago probably, exchange of letters between President Clinton and President Yeltsin on the issue of Budapest, you would see that that Ukraine was a secondary, if not the tertiary issue in the months to come until the Budapest Memorandum.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to, just before we close, really give a note of admiration for Sergey, who was not my friend when the invasion happened. We sort of used to see each other around the UN. And he used to come into the Security Council, and I could feel the tension and the anger in him. And I really admire, Sergey, how you were able to use your position to fight for your country. I found it very brave and very inspiring. And it allowed me to see that even diplomats can go to war just like soldiers, but in a different arena. So I think you deserve all the admiration and respect that, that I have for you.
We are so grateful to have you here, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Dr. Lennon, for a great discussion. I think each of our visitors, we could have talked all day. In the interest of time, I would like to introduce our next visitor. I am honored to introduce Ambassador Christina Marcus Lassen, the permanent representative of Denmark to the United Nations since September 2023. In her current position, she is responsible for working in partnership with Denmark's special representative to advance Denmark's candidacy for a seat in the UN Security Council in 2025. Ambassador Lassen has had 27 years of experience in diplomacy and has served in multiple places around the globe. She was the first secretary in the political department at the Danish Embassy in Washington from 2000 to 2004. In September 2009, she assumed her first ambassadorial appointment, concurrently representing Denmark in both Syria and Jordan from the Danish Embassy in Damascus. At the age of 38, she became the youngest woman to hold such a position in the history of the Danish Foreign Service. I want to just take a moment to give some personal reflections. Earlier this week, we saw the Prime Minister of Denmark make a very bold statement to say that 100% of Danish ammunition will be provided to Ukraine. Is that correct? Artillery, I knew. And she encouraged European countries to do the same, and to paraphrase, she said, we don't need it right now. And Ukraine needs it now, and if we don't give it to them now, we may need it later. I think that was very powerful. And one more personal reflection, because if you indulge me, so I and many of the leaders of our community organizations nowadays are children of refugees from the last time this happened. And because I'm a product of a war, I've been a pacifist my whole life. I don't believe in weapons and wars. And until recently, I have not, recently I came to understand that actually ammunition is humanitarian aid. And so thank you for your country's commitment, and I welcome you here today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to be here and speak here on this extremely special day. I think I just want to follow up on the last speaker to say that Ambassador Kimani, and it's not a lot of diplomats who get to do those kind of speeches in their diplomatic life, and I think you're talking about boldness and our previous diplomats from previous generations being better than us. I think you and our dear Ukrainian ambassador, dear Sergei, you have both shown that diplomats can actually really make a difference also in this day and age. So we're all admiring you, and we all at the same time feel that of course we should be doing even more in this situation that has been so shocking for all of us. And I think it's special to be here today. Earlier today I was watching the news clips from my own country, Denmark. I was seeing people pouring out in the streets for support demonstrations for Ukraine, ending up at the Russian embassy, as it's happened so many times over these last 2 years. And I think if there's really anything I want to leave with you in my very short remarks this afternoon is that I think there has been, as the Consul General of Poland was saying before, this war has been an inflection point, obviously not just for Ukraine, but also and in particular for Europe and for the rest of the world. But I think in Europe, we cannot underestimate how much this war has meant to us and how much it had changed our mindset. And again, to answer the question that our Ambassador Kimani asked before, have we learned from this? I think, yes, so far we have learned some lessons, and some of the remarks from my Prime Minister this week and throughout the last 2 years really show that, but I want to come back to that. Just to say because we've started otherwise on personal notes here this afternoon, unlike my other diplomatic colleagues here, I was not in New York when this happened. I was back in Copenhagen. Those days before the invasion, I had actually just returned from a trip to the border on the contact line with my foreign minister at the time, a few weeks before, where we were all just extremely worried what would happen, but still couldn't really imagine that this was actually going to take place. And even the Ukrainian soldiers we visited out there were basically saying to us, it's not happening, it's too crazy, and that's what we thought. But then, of course, at that last fatal week, we all saw what was coming. And I myself, I mean, we're talking about wake-up calls here. I got a real physical wake-up call from the ambassador of Ukraine to Denmark, 4:30 in the morning, and that was the official message from the Ukrainian government to Denmark that the war had actually started, what we feared and dreaded so much had actually begun. And so that's one of these never forget moments, but it's also really a turning point in my country's history, in all of Europe's history, I believe, because we've seen such an immense solidarity with Ukraine, obviously because we were so inspired by the immensely brave and inspirational and resilient Ukrainian people, but has also been so clear to Europe from day one, and I was present that very first day, the 24th of February, when the European leaders all flew together that same afternoon to Brussels to declare our full support with Ukraine. There was no hesitation from anyone, and we still don't say that. And I just want to, we still don't see that. And I want to say that because we keep hearing about Ukraine fatigue, but certainly when it comes down to it, I don't think that's what we're really seeing in Europe right now. My own country, and we were just hearing that before, it certainly has been a very big change from the day we saw the people pouring out in the street and putting Ukrainian flags everywhere, to the determination of my government to support Ukraine has been something that was really unthinkable before. And we were just hearing how ammunition can be humanitarian assistance. I have to say that's something that was really unthinkable in my country. But now, 2 years later, we are in a situation where even though we're a country that's extremely pacific and believe in diplomatic and political solutions, we are now one of the biggest supporters of military equipment to Ukraine. I was looking at numbers now, and these things are hard to really compare, but it seems that in real terms we're actually number 5 in the world, which for a country of 6 million people, that's quite extraordinary. And not to bore you with... So numbers, maybe not to bore with that, but as we just heard, we have decided the Danish Armed Forces have basically donated all their artillery that we had just actually purchased to Ukraine because, as the Prime Minister says, they needed more. We have led the coalition that has been brought together to support Ukraine with fighter jets, including donating a number of our own F-16s. And yesterday, as the ambassador of Ukraine was just mentioning, my Prime Minister was in Ukraine for the 4th or 5th time since the war started, meeting with the President Zelensky and signing, I think it's number 4 in a row now, of these new security treaties with Ukraine, basically promising our military security, but also reconstruction support for the next 10 years. So we were extremely proud of that. We wanted this to happen before today, today's commemoration, and that's something that the whole Parliament is actually standing behind, and the whole Danish people. So I wanted just to mention that. But we also want to... So military support is something, one thing, and that's what is the most needed right now, because we need, obviously, to push back the aggressor, but we also need to create hope for tomorrow. And that's why, since very early on, it's been a priority for my government to focus also on the reconstruction, the recovery assistance, the reconstruction, even when it's really a time that we wouldn't normally venture into this, but we thought it was important also to keep the hope of the Ukrainian people. When President Zelensky spoke to the Danish Parliament, this was via video link back in April 2022, he asked specifically if Denmark could somehow adopt the region of Mykolaiv. I'm still never sure why he picked that region, but we did have some cooperation. We had some similarities, being also a coastal nation with the city and region of Mykolaiv. And we decided to do that, to basically concentrate our efforts in that city, trying to create a special hope for the city of the region that has, of course, been under immense attack during the invasion. We recently, just a few weeks ago, opened an embassy office there, also to show that we're in this for the long haul, and it adds up, of course, to all the military support and everything else we're doing. I would be amiss if I didn't also mention the extreme support of the Danish people, and again, I think this is something we've seen all over Europe. Poland, of course, being a special case here, opening their homes and houses and apartments and everything to house millions and millions, 10 millions going through, Ukrainian refugees, But the same happening in Denmark, really, with a private initiative that we have never seen people driving down to the border of Ukraine. That's quite a long trip, I would say, even for Americans. But picking up people, helping refugees, doing private and voluntary contributions, and of course, receiving Ukrainians with open arms. And that's not like that has been a burden or something that people have been upset about. I just saw numbers yesterday saying that 8 out of 10 Ukrainians in Denmark and refugee status are actually working. They wanted to come there. They wanted to have their own jobs. They didn't want to just sit on welfare and be served by the Danish government. They wanted to get out there and work for themselves. We also know that these people, as we've also already seen in Poland, want to go back and help rebuild their country. So we just want to make sure that they get as qualified and as ready for that as long when they're actually in Denmark. I wanted to say these few words today also just to say that we might have a debate over here about whether or not Ukraine fatigue and whether we should continue supporting. I've heard often, not just in this city but also further south, that there's a sort of Europe is not doing its share. It's not what we see when we look at the numbers. Europe is really in for this for the long haul, and we want to continue supporting Ukraine. We really believe in the ultimate defeat of the Russian aggressor, and we want to continue supporting Ukraine, not just because for Ukraine, but also for the security of Europe, but also most importantly, for the principles that we all believe in. And I think Ambassador Kimani again said that as usual, super eloquently. We need to show that if we don't push the aggressor back, there's going to be a doubling down, and we need to stand up for the principles, for the UN Charter, and for everything we believe with, or it's also going to come back to haunt us in the end. So thank you for inviting us in here today. It's been such a pleasure and an honor. And again, as my Prime Minister was saying in her personal video message today to the Ukrainian people, I should have brought her here today. But she was giving a very personal, she has an extremely strong tie with President Zelensky now, who they have been visiting back and forth, including with their spouses several times in these past 2 years. And she was ending on a very personal message, and of course ending with something that all of you can say much better than me, but I'll try anyway. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was really very moving. And now it falls upon me to introduce somebody who probably needs no introduction. He's been up on the floor already. We all know him. But I'll do it anyway. Ambassador Kyslytsya is a career diplomat who has held a multitude of positions serving Ukraine. He was appointed to Ukraine's permanent Ukraine's permanent representative to the United Nations in 2019, and he has served in that capacity since then. He holds the diplomatic rank of Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, and was the recipient of the Ukrainian Order of Merit in the 3rd degree in 2021. This award is given to individuals for outstanding achievements in economics, science, culture, military, or political spheres of activity. As you've heard over and over again this afternoon, he is a very, very passionate and powerful representative for Ukraine in the United Nations. We are so proud to have him representing us, and I'm also very, very delighted to call him my friend. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ambassador Kyslytsya.
Well, thank you all, and I'm so humbled by the powerful speech of both Christina and Martin, who hurt me at the same time because he called me not being his friend. I hope it has changed, Martin. You know, we all follow the news, and I'm sure some of you have heard the following in the news. I have been forced to the conclusion that we cannot win this war for that country, regardless of how much assistance we extend. Does it sound familiar? Do we read it in the news? Yes and no. Because the exact quote is, let me read it once again, "I have been forced to the conclusion that we cannot win this war for England, regardless of how much assistance we extend." That was said, that was the part of the address delivered at the America First Committee meeting in this very city in New York in April 1941. And that was a very emblematic, very popular person, Mr. Charles Lindbergh, who insisted, along his fellow members of the America First Committee, that no matter how much the United States would help England, there was no way England would win the war against Germany. So as you may read in the Ecclesiastes, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. So the question is not whether there are lessons out there of history. The question is whether we are all good students and capable to learn those lessons. Lindbergh resigned from the Air Force because the President of the United States criticized his position. Lindbergh wanted to re-enlist into the Air Force after the Pearl Harbor tragedy happened. But my question is to all of you, does this country need another Pearl Harbor to really learn the lesson? And my answer is no, this country does not need another Pearl Harbor. And this country does need another Pearl Harbor because this country is very strong. And I do believe that the majority of the Americans and that the majority of the congressmen and congresswomen in Washington, D.C. will vote for the supplemental, will vote to appropriate money to help Ukraine, because neither this country nor Europe wants another Pearl Harbor. I'm so proud to be here with many American, or rather no, not many American Ukrainians. It's, the proper word is many Ukrainian Americans. And one of the persons I really would like to acknowledge is my very good friend Kvitka. Kvitka, please stand up. Don't be shy, stand up. Kvitka has been with me every step of the road, every single day. And for those of you who doesn't speak Ukrainian, Kvitka means flower. So Kvitka being my flower. Look, Kvitka, I will give you a special present, very special one. And I will explain it why it is special. Christina has one. Christina, show that you have the same one. And it is special not only because it is blue and yellow, not because it has Ukraine, but because there is a wonderful, wonderful African woman in the country which is called Kenya, who made those bracelets, and she gave it to her son, Ambassador Kimani, and Ambassador Kimani sent it to my office, and now I give it to the most special people like Kvitka, like Christina, and other friends. But seriously, I think that today is a particularly important day in the history of the Ukrainian Institute of America. And it is important because maybe for the very first time, and I need to ask Kathy and Lydia, we have such a powerful speech by an African ambassador. And I have to tell all of us that shame on us that it took us so long while to have an African ambassador here at the American Institute of America. We needed a war to have Kimani speaking to us here. And there is nothing new under the sun. The war in Ukraine is not a new war. There are more than 50 conflicts around the world currently. There's a tragedy that is going on in the Middle East. There is a tragedy in Syria where Christina served. There is a tragedy in Sudan. There is a tragedy in Yemen. And when we speak about Ukrainian children like we did yesterday in a side event at the headquarters, we have to keep in mind that only in Yemen, between 2015 and 2020, 11,000 Yemeni children were killed in the warfare, in addition to those who died of hunger, sickness, and other reasons. In Somalia alone, in 2022, 48,000 people died of drought, half of them children. So when you think about the victory of Ukraine, think about other conflicts that are still raging around the globe. And it is our responsibility to have the optics right, so when we go to the Security Council, we see others, and we need to help others. And that is partly the mission that we have to perform, and it is our duty. And that is why I am ambassador to the United Nations. And we should be united. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kimani. Thank you, Ambassador Lassen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you everybody for joining us. This wraps up the formal part of our day in the room here. If you haven't had an opportunity to see the exhibits upstairs, please do so. I know we said everything would close at 5, but we're running a little over. It's Ukrainian time. And we love having everybody here. So we've said it many times before this afternoon, Slava Ukraini. And I'm going to add one other thing, which is Do Peremoghi, which is to victory. Thank you all to all of you for all you do to help us get there. Thank you.